I had covered the Vaethari Sovereign Convocation for 11 years. I knew the chamber the way you know a recurring dream. The smell of the polished resin floors, the low harmonic hum the convocation's ceiling panels made when the ventilation ran at full capacity, the particular quality of silence that fell when the sovereign arbiter rose from the high seat. I had a press credential, a fixed gallery position in the third tier, and a habit of arriving early enough to watch the delegations file in. I was there the morning they declared war on Earth. The session was not announced as a war declaration. The official notation in the convocation's public agenda read, Instrument of Sovereign Clarification. Final reading. I had seen that language before. It was the convocation's preferred vocabulary, when it wanted to do something it could not defend in plain words. The human mission sat at the delegate table below the gallery. 3 people. Deputy Envoy Kala Renner in the center, flanked by her 2 aides. She had been Earth's representative here for 6 years. A careful, unhurried woman who had survived 3 different sovereign arbiters without ever raising her voice. She did not raise it that morning either. She sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her and watched the chamber fill. Members who rarely attended in person had made the journey, and the gallery where I sat was shoulder to shoulder with observers and correspondents from a dozen allied systems. The Vaethari enjoy an audience when they are certain of the outcome. Sovereign Arbiter Drenvasoth entered at the 3rd bell. The chamber rose. He was an old administrator, 42 years on the high seat, longer than most careers in this building, and he moved with the measured confidence of a man who had never once been surprised by the thing he were intended to do. He acknowledged the chamber with a tilt of his head. The chamber sat. He did not look at the human table. The reading took 11 minutes. I transcribed it in full, though I will not reproduce it here at length. The substance. Earth's sovereign registry entry, on file with the convocation for 63 years, was reclassified, effective upon the instrument's ratification, from independent signatory to administrative dependent, a subordinate classification, carrying no corridor rights, no treaty standing, and no vote. Simultaneous with that reclassification, the instrument of sovereign clarification declared Earth in material breach of its obligations under a 2009 framework agreement, assessed compensatory damages, and declared a state of active enforcement, which under Vaethari governance law was the functional equivalent of a war declaration. Vaethari read that last clause himself, departing from the clerk who had handled the preceding text, a deliberate choice. He wanted his voice on the record for the ending. The chamber responded as chambers do when they have been waiting to respond. The Allied delegations did not applaud, but several of them did not object either, which amounted to the same thing at a table like this. The Vaethari bloc was unified, vocal, and satisfied. A war declaration, dressed in administrative language, but a war declaration, against Earth, ratified and entered into permanent record before noon. Calla Renner did not move during the reading. She did not move during the response. She sat with her hands folded, and her eyes on the sovereign arbiter, and she waited for the chamber to settle. And when it had settled enough for a voice to carry, she picked up the document case at her left elbow, stood, and walked out. No statement. No demand for the floor. No formal protest notation lodged with the clerk's desk. She simply left, and her two aides left with her. And the doors at the far end of the chamber closed behind them with a sound that was, I thought, quieter than it should have been. The convocation noted the exit and moved to adjourn. The sovereign arbiter set the ratification timestamp at 11:42 local. The clerk entered it into the permanent record. The session was closed. I stayed in the gallery until the delegates had cleared. This is a habit. I find that the last 10 minutes of an empty chamber tell you more than the 2 hours that preceded them. The Vaethari staff were already moving between the tables, collecting session materials. Someone was recalibrating the holographic display panels above the speaker's floor. It looked, as it always looked after a major session, like ordinary administration. My notification arrived at 12:09, 27 minutes after ratification. It came through the convocation's own archival disclosure system, the automated relay that pushes registered instrument notifications to credentialed observers as a matter of procedural transparency. I almost did not look at it immediately, because the system routinely generates cleanup notifications after major sessions, and most of them are administrative noise. But the subject line used a classification string I had not seen before, and I had been doing this long enough to know that unfamiliar classification strings are worth reading. The instrument was designated a contingent succession filing. It had been entered into the convocation's own permanent record 11 years prior, during Earth's original framework accession, under the individual accreditation of the then Deputy Envoy, a different name, a predecessor to Renner, someone who had apparently been thinking about this problem for a long time. The filing was cross-referenced to the exact article of Vaethari governance law that Vaethari had invoked that morning. The relevant clause read, with a precision that I suspect was not accidental. In the event of a sovereign clarification instrument reclassifying an independent signatory, administrative dependent, all corridor operating authorities held under the signatory's treaty standing shall transfer, in interim stewardship, to the individual accreditation of the signatory's senior resident envoy, pending a restoration hearing before a quorum of 47 independent member delegations, 47 delegations, the exact number of corridor nodes Earth held under its now voided treaty standing. A restoration hearing requiring a 47 delegation quorum could not, under convocation scheduling rules, be convened in fewer than 90 days. I read the filing 3 times. Then I read the governance law it cited. Then I sat in the empty gallery and thought about 11 years of attending sessions in this building, and about a deputy envoy I had watched walk out of a room without saying a word, and about a predecessor I had never met, who had apparently sat down 11 years ago with the convocation's own procedural code and decided to file a document that meant nothing until the morning it meant everything. It contested the filing's applicability. The challenge was logged and time-stamped. The corridor authorities had already transferred on ratification. The legal challenge did not suspend the transfer. It only extended the record. By 18 o'clock, 4 of the 47 corridor nodes had sent routine operations confirmations to Renner's individual accreditation, not to the Vaethari Dominion's Transit Authority, not to the Convocation's Administrative Registry, to her, by name, by the accreditation number on a document filed 11 years before she held this posting. The Convocation had declared war on an entity that no longer existed in its registry as a treaty party. It had not declared war on the corridors. It had not declared war on the individual accreditation of a woman who was, at that moment, presumably somewhere in this city, doing whatever she did when she was finished for the day. You cannot prosecute a war declaration against a private individual's interim stewardship authority. This is not a rule anyone in the Vaethari Dominion had ever felt the need to write down. Because no one had ever thought they would need it, they needed it now. The sovereign arbiter called an emergency session at 20 o'clock. I went back to the gallery and watched the Vaethari legal staff try to explain the problem to a room full of allies who had arrived that morning to celebrate a war, and were now being told that the declaration was legally coherent, but operationally inert. The chamber did not respond to this the way it had responded to the morning session. There was no applause. There was the kind of silence that fills a room when the people in it are too experienced to show what they are feeling. I left before the session closed. I had enough. 11 years covering this building. Delegations recalled and replaced. I had seen chambers change their minds in the span of a recess. But I had never seen a war declared and dissolved by the same document in the space of 8 hours. Dissolved not by force, not by counter-declaration, not by any human voice raised in protest, but by a filing that had been sitting in the convocation's own archive since before most of the people in that room had taken their seats. Calla Renner did not contact the press that evening. She had nothing to say to us, and she knew it. The work had already been done. To give that body's own rules the power to erase itself, and then wait, quietly, for the morning they decide to use them.